TV18.
2023 is drawing to a close, and it's been a year of several landmark cases in the Supreme Court. From same-sex marriage to Article 370, the Apex Court heard some of the most high-profile cases and delivered its verdict. The Adani Hindenburg matter was arguably the biggest corporate case of the year. Ashmit Kumar is here with the year that was in India's top court.
The year 2023 was a landmark year with several key issues being heard or decided by Indian courts. So here's a look back at the biggest news stories out of Court Corner. Arguably, one of the biggest cases was the landmark ruling by a 5-judge bench in the Article 370 case. A case that probably has more political repercussions than legal. The Supreme Court upheld the abrogation of Article 370. The Supreme Court held that J&K enjoys no sovereignty and that the Indian Constitution is applicable fully. The Supreme Court also hoped that statehood should be restored soon and that elections would be conducted before September 30th, 2024. Number 2, here's another high-voltage case, the same-sex marriage matter. It was again a ruling by a 5-judge bench. The Supreme Court gave a big no to same-sex marriages and to the fundamental right to marry. The Supreme Court also held that it's not the court's job to grant the right to marry to same-sex partners and that issue should be left to the government. Review petitions, meanwhile, have already been filed. Number 3, here's another case with big political implications, especially ahead of the 2024 elections. In March, the Supreme Court held that election commissioners had to be appointed by a panel of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice of India. In August, the centre introduced a new law that replaced the CJI with a cabinet minister. Now, even as the parliament granted its nod, former Supreme Court Judge Rohinton Nariman claimed that this will hurt the Election Commission's independence and that free and fair elections will soon become a chimera. Number 4, Supreme Court also saw multiple rounds of legal contests between the Delhi and central government over administrative control over the national capital. In May, the Supreme Court cited the federal structure and granted Delhi government control over administrative services. Now, much like in the case of the Election Commission appointments, the centre again came out with a new law after the Supreme Court ruling and gave the Delhi LG the powers of administration. Number 5. This was the biggest corporate case of the year, the Adani Hindenburg saga. In March, the Supreme Court directed for a SEBI probe and asked an expert panel to review the regulatory framework in place. Now, in June, the expert committee came out and said that there was no regulatory failure and there was no evidence against Adani. In August, SEBI informed the top court that probe was completed in 22 out of 24 cases. In November, the Supreme Court reserved its judgment while observing that there was no reason to doubt SEBI's investigation. Number 6, the Supreme Court also heard pleas challenging electoral bonds. Petitioners claimed that bonds were opaque and where only the government knew the donors. The centre submitted that voters can't have an overbroad right to know and that the Supreme Court reserved its judgment after that while flagging selective confidentiality of this scheme. And finally, number 7, this was not so much a case but rather an issue, a sensitive issue at that. Now, keep in mind, in 2018, 4 sitting Supreme Court judges held a press conference against the then CJI, Deepak Mishra. The judges had flagged allocation of cases, of specially sensitive cases, to specific judges. Now, cut to 2023 and similar concerns were shared by senior advocate Dushyant Dave in a letter to the CJI. Reports have cited how the case on judicial appointments was taken away from Justice Kaul and how some politically sensitive matters were listed for hearing before Justice Bela Trivedi. Now, with the Supreme Court scheduled to hear the CAA case as well as the review of the same-sex judgment matter and also likely to deliver its judgment in the Adani Hindenburg case as well as the electoral bonds case, 2024 is already looking like a busy year for the top court.
Well, away from court matters now to money matters. India's banking sector is in good shape and the Nifty Bank Index is up over 10% in 2023. Asset quality is the best that we've seen in a decade, but valuations are still below pre-COVID levels in many cases. Abhishek Kothari wraps up the year that was for Indian banks and tells you what's in store in 2024.
We all know that the banking sector's fundamentals with respect to return ratios and credit cost are the best and lowest respectively in a decade or more. Now, asset quality of the banking sector is the best in 10 years or more, which has been aided by decline in slippage ratio as well. So this has been on account of the cleanup exercise taken by the banks earlier. Now, loan growth has returned to the banking sector after a long time. Deposit growth has also been very healthy. However, the valuations are not defining the sector's true fundamental pictures. Valuations of many banks are below the pre-COVID levels or below 2019 valuations that were seen. This despite the fact that the bank's capital adequacy ratio, provision coverage ratio are one of the best that you are seeing in last decade or even more. So to put valuations into context, we need to understand how they were in terms of movement seen pre-COVID between FY09 to FY19. During this period, the highest valuation gain was seen for the banks like IndusInd Bank, ICICI Bank, Federal Bank and Axis Bank. In fact, the most expensive stock was Kotak Mahindra Bank, followed by HDFC Bank and IndusInd Bank. Now, post-COVID, the valuation picture of banks have seen a lot of change. ICICI Bank, Bank of Baroda and State Bank of India are the only lenders to witness expansion in their valuations from what they were in FY19 to what they are in FY24. Many banks are still trading at FY24 valuations that are below those that were seen in FY19. These includes the names like IndusInd Bank, Kotak Bank, HDFC Bank and Axis Bank. Net interest margins of lenders can moderate in the first half of calendar year 2024 given the fact that cost of funds will continue to weigh in. Return ratios, that is return on assets and return on equity, will remain healthy at least in H1 CY24. Now it may moderate a bit but not significantly. Watch out for the credit cost in unsecured segment on which RBI has raised certain concerns. Some players may feel the heat on this segment. Deposits and advances growth to remain healthy for the banking sector even in calendar year 2024.
Well, retail investors have had a good year in the stock markets, but 2023 was also the year that the mutual fund space took its foot off the gas when it came to new fund offers. Shivani Bajaj details the trend and explains the reasons behind it.
Well, mutual funds in India have had a splendid run over the last few years, and when 2023 began, it was expected that this year would be no different. To a large extent, it was not. As of November end, MF inflows have come in at 49 lakh crore rupees, with 40% going into equity funds. The difference this year, however, is the number of new fund offers that were launched in this year. Now, remember, NFOs are how fund houses typically cash in on new trends and opportunities. So, the fact that only 191 new fund offers were launched this year is telling. I say only 191 because this number is less than the 228 NFOs launched in 2022. 2023 has also seen relatively lesser money coming into mutual funds through NFOs. 53,000 crore rupees, which is 13% less than 62,000 crores raised through this route in 2022. Now, experts and industry watchers say that one of the biggest reasons for the significant decline in the number of new launches this year is the change in debt taxation. The Finance Act of 2023 removed the benefit of long-term capital gains tax for debt mutual funds. Essentially, it said that gains made from mutual fund schemes that have less than 35% allocation in equity would be taxed as short-term capital gains, so now at 30% instead of the earlier 10%. This would apply irrespective of the period for which the units were held. In effect, what it did was it turned investors away from such funds, specifically the target maturity funds. TMFs had seen a surge in popularity in the previous 2 years because they were open-ended funds and offered a fixed rate of return. Now, to give you a sense of their popularity, between January and March 2023, 31 new passive funds were launched and all of them were target maturity funds. However, once the new tax rule kicked in from the 1st of April, guess how many TMFs were launched? Only 3 after April till December 1st. Of course, new passive funds continue to be launched, but they were mostly in the equity space. Overall, in 2023, 50 new index schemes were launched and these together cloaked inflows of 2,500 crore rupees. In contrast, in 2022, 84 index funds were launched, most of them target maturity funds, and inflows in these schemes came in at 11,235 crore rupees. To be fair, through the slowdown in debt mutual funds has been the only big bump in the road for mutual funds in 2023. In all, thanks to the bull run in the equity markets, business has been good. There were 45 equity NFOs in all, raking over 30,000 crore rupees by November end. Sectoral and thematic funds saw the most buzz between January and the end of November. 25 new sectoral and thematic funds were launched, garnering around 13,000 crore rupees in their NFO period. The big draw, however, were funds focusing on infrastructure and public sector undertakings. Several themes like infrastructure, PSU theme and banking sector were played via business cycles funds and quant funds. This interest has been rewarded as well. Thematic funds have offered year-to-date average returns of 54% to investors, and infrastructure funds have given average returns of 42% year-to-date. New fund offers also were launched in diversified categories like multi-asset funds and multi-cap funds. They have also continued to attract investors in 2023. Now, 6 new multi-cap funds were launched, garnering around 7,200 crore rupees. It also saw 6 multi-asset allocations funds, NFOs, garnering over 6,500 crore rupees in 2023. While multi-cap funds offered year-to-date returns of 31%, multi-asset funds also offered close to 20% returns to investors. So overall, the mutual fund industry has had a good year, and barring the jolt from the new taxation rules, has been riding high on the bull run and giving investors fatter wallets.
Well, time for us to head to a short break, but when we return, we take a look back at the performance of other asset classes in 2023, especially commodities, and also a closer look at what's been a tumultuous year for online gaming companies. We're back in 2 on Rewind 2023.